The East India Company, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and exploitation. Few entities in history have wielded such influence on a global scale. This is the story of the East India Company. Prepare to delve into the heart of an empire built on spices, textiles, and ultimately, exploitation. From its humble beginnings in the 17th century, the East India Company quickly rose to prominence. Driven by the insatiable European appetite for Eastern goods, it established a vast network of trading posts and factories. India, with its rich resources and exotic spices, became the company's crown jewel. The company's influence seeped into every aspect of Indian life. This was not just trade, it was the birth of a corporate empire. The East India Company's story is one of stark contrasts. It brought immense wealth to Britain, fueling the Industrial Revolution and solidifying its place as a global power. Yet this wealth came at a terrible cost. India, once a land of prosperity, was systematically drained of its resources and left economically crippled. The East India Company's story is a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and the enduring impact of colonialism. Our story begins in the late 16th century. England, eager for a share of the lucrative spice trade with the East Indies, found itself lagging behind its European rivals. In 1599, a group of ambitious London merchants petitioned Queen Elizabeth I for a royal charter to establish a trading company. They sought to challenge the existing monopolies and secure a direct route to the riches of the East. The Queen, recognizing the potential for national prosperity, granted their request. On December 31, 1600, the East India Company was born. The royal charter granted the company a monopoly over English trade with the East Indies for the next 15 years. This meant that only the East India Company had the exclusive right to buy and sell goods from this vast region. It could raise its own armies, negotiate treaties with foreign powers, and even mint its own coins. It was a bold experiment in corporate power, one that would have far-reaching consequences. Armed with their royal charter, the East India Company wasted no time in setting sail for the East. Their first voyage, led by Captain James Lancaster, departed from London in 1601. The company's early voyages were primarily focused on establishing trade relations and securing access to spices. They faced stiff competition from the established Dutch and Portuguese traders. However, the East India Company was relentless in its pursuit of wealth and power. The East India Company's early success hinged on one commodity: spices. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon were in high demand in Europe, fetching exorbitant prices. The company's ships returned from the East laden with these precious goods, reaping enormous profits for the investors back in London. These profits fueled further expansion, allowing the company to finance more voyages and establish a stronger presence in the East. The demand for spices back in Europe was insatiable, and the East India Company was more than happy to meet it. Beyond spices, the East India Company soon diversified its portfolio. They realized the immense potential of Indian textiles, renowned for their quality and craftsmanship. Silk, cotton, and muslin fabrics became highly sought after in Europe, fueling a booming trade. Another lucrative commodity emerged: opium. The East India Company, once solely focused on spices, had become a trading behemoth, dealing in a diverse range of goods. As the East India Company's wealth and influence grew, so too did its ambition. No longer content with simply trading, the company began to exert political and military control over its areas of operation. They exploited divisions within the Indian subcontinent, playing local rulers against each other to secure advantageous treaties. The company raised its own armies, comprised of both European and Indian soldiers known as sepoys. The East India Company, once a humble trading venture, was morphing into a colonial power. The company's pursuit of profit came at a steep cost to India. The vast wealth extracted from the subcontinent came at the expense of local industries and artisans. Indian weavers were often forced to sell their goods at artificially low prices, crippling their livelihoods. This economic exploitation led to widespread poverty and resentment among the Indian population. The seeds of discontent were sown, setting the stage for future uprisings and challenges to the company's authority. The East India Company's trade with India wasn't a simple exchange of goods. It involved a complex system of payments that resulted in a massive flow of silver from west to east. The silver, often sourced from Spanish colonies in the Americas, represented a tangible transfer of wealth. It flowed into India, bolstering its economy and enriching its rulers. Silver, once a rare commodity in India, became increasingly common, a testament to the sheer scale of the East India Company's trade. While silver flowed east, something else was flowing west. Profits. The East India Company's trade with India generated immense wealth for its investors back in Britain. These profits, often reinvested in new ventures, helped fuel the Industrial Revolution. Britain's factories, hungry for capital and raw materials, found a willing partner in the East India Company. The East India Company, once a mere trading company, was now an indispensable engine of Britain's industrial growth. The East India Company's profits weren't just for factories. They financed Britain's military ambitions. The company's armies in India needed vast sums. The British government relied on the company's coffers, making regular payments to the Crown, subsidizing British military power in the East. The influx of wealth from India had a transformative effect on Britain. London blossomed into a global financial hub, awash in the riches of empire. The British government, flush with revenue from the East India Company, invested in infrastructure, education, and military expansion. Britain's navy, funded in part by the company's profits, grew into the most powerful in the world. The East India Company, initially chartered to trade, had inadvertently become the architect of a global empire. The term drain of wealth aptly describes the economic reality of 18th-century India under the East India Company's rule. The drain encompassed forced exports and the crippling of local industries. Imagine a constant siphoning of resources, a steady outflow of wealth. This drain was embedded in the East India Company's trade practices and policies. It was a slow, insidious process that enriched Britain at India's expense. The economic impact of the drain on India was devastating. Once a land renowned for its prosperity and craftsmanship, India witnessed a steady decline in its economic fortunes. The company's policies, designed to maximize profits for its shareholders, often came at the expense of Indian farmers, artisans, and merchants. Indian weavers, famed for their exquisite textiles, found themselves undercut by cheap British imports, their livelihoods destroyed. The traditional economic fabric of India was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a system designed to serve British interests. The drain of wealth wasn't just about the tangible loss of resources. It also impacted India's ability to develop its own industries and infrastructure. The capital that could have built a modern Indian economy was siphoned off to Britain. This created a cycle of underdevelopment, leaving India dependent on Britain. The wealth extracted from India wasn't simply squandered on lavish lifestyles by British elites. It played a crucial role in sustaining Britain's economic and military dominance. The East India Company's profits financed wars, expanded the navy, and maintained the empire. The irony was stark. Wealth from one of the poorest regions was used to subjugate more territories. Robert Clive is synonymous with the East India Company's rise to power in India. Arriving as a clerk in 1744, Clive's ambition propelled him through the ranks. He transformed the company into a dominant military force, altering Indian history. Clive's military campaigns were ruthless. His victories secured dominance but were achieved through brutal tactics. The battle was, by all accounts, a lopsided affair. Clive, through a combination of shrewd tactics and treachery, routed the Nawab's forces, securing a resounding victory for the East India Company. The victory gave the company control over Bengal's vast resources, including its lucrative textile industry and fertile agricultural lands. Clive exploited his position to enrich himself, often at the expense of the people he governed. Upon his return to England in 1760, Clive brought a fortune of £234,000. Adjusted for inflation, Clive's wealth would be worth hundreds of millions today, buying political influence and a seat in Parliament. Clive's story is a cautionary tale of ambition, greed, and the corrupting influence of unchecked power. He rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful men in India, amassing a vast fortune in the process. Robert Clive, however, his legacy is tarnished by the brutal methods he employed and the exploitation that underpinned his rise to power. The wealth he accumulated came at a steep price, paid for by the people of Bengal who suffered under his rule. The East India Company's impact extended far beyond India. Its tentacles shaped economies, influenced wars, and left an indelible mark on history. From Southeast Asia's spice markets to Europe's coffee houses, the company's presence was transformative. The world today owes much to the East India Company, for better or worse. The company's ships, laden with exotic goods, sailed to ports across Europe and the Americas. They carried spices, textiles, and porcelain that transformed Western society. The East India Company's influence wasn't confined to the Atlantic world. Its ships sailed to China, seeking access to its vast market and coveted goods. China, under the Qing dynasty, was a formidable power, wary of foreign influence. The company's early attempts to establish trade with China were met with resistance. The clash of cultures and economic interests would eventually lead to conflict. The East India Company's appetite for Chinese tea fueled the opium trade. Opium, grown in India, was smuggled into China, despite its devastating social consequences. The Chinese government's attempts to suppress the trade led to the First Opium War, a humiliating defeat for China. China ceded Hong Kong to Britain and opened its ports. The East India Company's legacy in China is one of exploitation, addiction, and war, a dark side of globalization. The East India Company's story is a complex tapestry of ambition, greed, and innovation. A small group of London merchants, driven by the allure of Eastern spices, reshaped the world. From trading venture to colonial behemoth, it wielded unprecedented power. Its legacy is far from simple. It connected East and West, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. Exotic spices and luxurious textiles transformed European tastes and industries. This prosperity came at a steep price, paid for by the people of India and other lands under the company's rule. The drain of wealth left India economically crippled, its industries decimated, and its people impoverished. The pursuit of profit led to exploitation, famine, and widespread suffering. The East India Company's story is a cautionary tale, reminding us of the dangers of unchecked corporate power and the enduring legacy of colonialism. It highlights the importance of ethical trade and sustainable practices. The lessons from the East India Company remain relevant today. The East India Company's legacy is still debated. Analyzed by historians today, some argue it modernized India with new technologies. Others say it was about wealth extraction and control. Its impact on the world is undeniable, a reminder of history's complexities and global interconnectedness. Learning from the past can help us create a just future. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the East India Company's tumultuous history. If you found this video insightful, please consider subscribing to our channel for more explorations of history's most captivating stories. Like this video and share it with others to spread awareness about this crucial period that continues to shape our world. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. What are your thoughts on the East India Company's legacy?